Hello there, YouTubers. It's been a while, a little bit since I put a video up, but I noticed a little bit of interest in my plugins video, and I thought because of that I'd put a video out explaining one of the plugins. Eventually, I'll get to all of them. I think two of them are pretty easily covered, but the other two, Common UI and Motion Warping, I think are the most difficult to try and get into if you're a little newer to Unreal Engine. And there's not much resources on them yet. There's more and more coming out, but they're still pretty difficult. I'm still learning a lot about them as well, but I figured I'd share what I know about them and also a couple other things that I'm going to share with you. What you're seeing here is the project I've been kind of busy working on my own time when I'm not working. And in this project, I am at the point where I'd like to put motion warping into my combat. I do have motion warping in some of my combat already, but I would like to add more of it. So I'm going to show you guys how to do that. And hopefully this will help some of your combat and maybe some other things that you can use motion warping for. I've seen people use it for mantling and all types of things. Just anything animation where you need to warp to a certain item. If you need your hand to go to like a doorknob or something like that, you can line up the animation so that it actually grabs the doorknob using motion warping. So that's really handy. But I'm going to show you guys today how to use it with combat. And without saying any more, let's get right into it. So you'll notice the project that I'm in right now, it's already something I've been working with. So don't get overwhelmed with the stuff that's in it or the folders or everything that I'm going to show you. I will create new things and guide you through everything that I can so that you guys can implement motion warping into something that you already have, preferably. If you don't have a combat system made, there's lots of tutorials online, but this will still help you out if you're doing other animation stuff and just want to implement motion warping and want to learn how to use it in different ways. So I'm just going to go into my player, and we have this thing called interfaces in our player. So I already have an interface created for this, but I'm going to create a new one. So I'm going to put it in my characters folder, in my player folder. You can put this, you can make your own player folder if you'd like, or if you already have a character folder. I have I have characters, then I have player, then I have interfaces. So I already have some interfaces, but you can just put this in your player folder. You can put this wherever you want. It doesn't really matter. But to do this, just right click anywhere in your folder, and you want to create a blueprint interface, which will be in your blueprint tab. So I'll create a new one and I'll just call it BP. I'm just going to call it temp player interface. So this is just pretty much a duplicate of what I already have here. So you can call it BP, or preferably BPI. Sorry, I don't know why I did that. BPI player interface. But for me, I'm just going to call it temp interface for now because I will delete it after. But when you open it up, there'll be nothing in it and it'll ask you to create a new function. So I'm going to create one and call it update warp target. Because pretty much what motion warping does is it warps your root motion animation. Since you're using root motion, it warps your root bone to a location and a rotation if you specify rotation. Usually it's just a location, but a lot of the times people usually add the rotation in there as well. At least I'm going to, and I'll show you how to do that. So for update warp target, we actually don't need any inputs or outputs. We just need the event. And the reason I use interfaces is to avoid casts. I'm really not someone who likes to use casts. We also need an animation interface. So if we create another blueprint interface, I'm just going to call it temp animation interface, since I already have animation interface. And I'm gonna also create the same thing. And I actually forgot about a function that we need. So we need update warp target, and we also need reset warp target. And we'll also need this in the player interface as well. So let's close that. Reset warp target. So all you need is these two interfaces, and both of them will have the same named function. And it seems odd for now, but trust me on this, okay? It's for a reason, and it's because I hate casts, and I'll show you how you can avoid them and use interfaces to your advantage. So if you have a character, for me, I have this player base, which is pretty much, it was just a duplicate of the third person character that I've added my combat onto. So if you are using the third person template, this would be just your third person character graph. I'm in a collapsed graph, but all my input information is here. So I have my move and look. I've just packed them into their collapsed nodes. I made them into macros just because it cleans things up, or either macros or functions depending on the input. But we can get onto that later. I'm getting off topic here. But once you're in your player graph, you'll have this thing called class settings, and you're going to want to go in here. And I already have some implemented interfaces. You're going to want to add the player interface that you made. So for me, it'll be my temp player interface, and I'm going to add that here. You'll see it show up in your implemented interfaces. And just compile and save. And reset warp target and update warp target. Now you can just double click on these, but for me, if I double click on these, I'll show you what'll happen. It'll actually bring me back to my other graph, and I don't want to be in here. So you can double click if you're just in your event graph, and it'll create both of these. For me, I'm just going to copy them into my other graph here for organization purposes, but you can keep them in your event graph. I'm just going to leave these for now. I'm going to put my comment around them, but I'm actually going to go to my animation blueprint. So for me, I called it Samurai Player, but for you, it'll probably be your third person blueprint. So I don't know if I have that anymore. This was my third person. So yeah, I don't have the animation blueprint. I just have my own. So for you, you'll probably have an animation blueprint called BP or Anim BP third person character or something like that. I forget exactly what they name it off the templates, but you're going to want to open up your animation blueprint. And in here, you'll have your animation graph. And if you don't have a slot set up, a default slot, for me, I have one called full body. I just renamed it. I added a new one, but you'll have a default slot that you're going to want to add. It should be in the Unreal 5 character by default, but if you don't have it, you can just search for slot, default slot, and just plug it in to your output pose, and then whatever you have going out, which is usually just a main state graph that'll be plugged into it. Sorry for if this is confusing, but hopefully you guys are still following along. All I've done is created those interfaces, so don't get too worried. But we're going to want to go to our event graph in our animation blueprint, and this is pretty much what you'll see by default, I think. And then you'll have it updating things. For me, I just packed them in. So it'll pretty much look like this, I think, by default. I just packed it into a function just to clean things up. And in your event graph, so not in your animation graph, so in your event graph, you're going to want to add those animation interface events that we added. So again, in your class settings for your animation blueprint, we'll add our animation. For me, it's my temp animation interface, but whatever you named yours. So now we have two interfaces, one for our player and one for our animation blueprint. And they have the same functions, the same name functions. And you'll see them show up here. So you're going to want to add your events. And for me, you can double click on these, but I'm just going to right click and search for reset warp target. And you'll see you have a couple options, call function or send a message. Now, sending a message is different than calling the function, but we don't want this either. I don't know why it's not searching up. Maybe we have to compile. Reset warp target. Ah, yes, here we go. So we want event reset warp target. So make sure you compiled. And then we want event update warp target. So we have these two events, and what we're going to want to do here is send the event from our animation blueprint to call our event in our player. So we already have a reference to our character in our animation blueprint, and this should be by default in Unreal Engine 5. And we're going to want this reference because we set this on our begin play right here. So we cast to our character, and we only want to cast this once. So it gets our owner and our whatever our owner character is, that's our character reference. So I was in a collapsed graph, if you're wondering what that was. But you can just put this in your event graph. It's the exact same thing. It's just for organization. So from your character, you're going to want to check does implement interface. Now, you can do this method, or I can show you a cleaner method of doing this, which I'm going to show you both. So you don't have to do this first part if you don't want to. If you want to do it the cleaner method, just wait. But this is one method to do it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to check if it has the player temp interface, temp player interface. So for you, it could just be player interface, like I've said before. And then if we're true, from the character, we're going to want to call that event. So update warp target. Now we have two things here. You're going to want to be careful because you have BPI temp animation interface and BPI temp player interface. So make sure it's the correct one. And it'll say when you pull it up as well, target is BPI temp player interface. Now, I wish they had a better way of showing this, honestly, because sometimes it is a little bit hard to track which events are which. But aside from that, I'm just going to add some reroute nodes, clean this up. Like I said, you don't have to do what I'm doing right here because I'm going to show you a better method. So this does implement interface. It's really good, but you're going to be using it a lot. If you're wanting to move away from casts, you're going to be using it a lot. So I made this macro, and I'll show you how to make it, and I called it mValidate interface. And what it does is it validates an interface. So we also want to check if this character is actually valid before we do anything. And we're going to want to do this. Oh, Unreal's doing its weird thing. Yeah. Okay. So if you have that bug, I don't know why I get that bug, but I just compile it and it fixes it. So we want to check if it's valid. Then we want to check if it has that interface that we're going to call the event on. So we're going to be using this a lot if we're using interfaces a lot. So I made this macro, and I'm going to show you what it is. And this is all it is. These are just print strings I added if I need to debug something. But I used that does implement interface function. And you guys can snap a picture of this, copy it, do whatever you need to do. This is in a macro library. And to create a macro library, anywhere in your, for me, I have it in my game libraries folder, but you can put it anywhere. And you just right click, same as you would add anything else, and go to Blueprints tab, and you'll see a Blueprint macro library. And when you create one of those, I just named mine macro library because really you really only need one, and then just categorize things. And categorize things, there's going to be a little category when you select your function, and you'll be able to highlight this and you can rename it. And as soon as you rename something that hasn't been, that's not already created, it'll add it to the list of categories for this blueprint. So it's really cool about Unreal. It's really handy to organize things, and I like taking advantage of that. So we're going to check to see if our test object, which is just an object reference, and we're going to make sure that it implements the interface and it is valid. And then we're just going to execute true or false. And I did return the object that we inputted just because it cleaned things up on the other end. So really nice macro you can create to make things easy for yourself. And if we go back to our, if we go back to our animation blueprint, I'm going to remove this, and our test object is going to be our character. And I'm going to check if it has the temp player interface. And our object out will just plug into that event. So again, if you don't know how to get this update warp target, you can also grab it from this and just say update warp target, find your player interface one, not your animation interface, because that's what we're living in. And you're going to want to call this event. So same thing, just a little bit cleaner. Now you're going to want to copy this down here, and we're going to call our reset warp target in our player interface. And I already have a comment, but if you don't know how to comment, just press C with your things selected. And for me, I'm going to call it update and reset warp target, or update and reset combat warping. All right, next, we want to create our functions in our player. So if you come back to our player, we're going to want to start with a sphere trace. And I'm going to sphere trace for objects right here. Sphere trace for objects, and it'll be at the bottom of your collision category. And I'm just going to move this down here for now. Now our start is going to be our actor location. So if you search for actor location, we're going to want get actor location and plug that into there. And we can do an add node and plug this into our end. And out of our add node, I'm kind of doing this backwards, but bear with me. This is pretty much how you get the forward direction of your character from your actor's location. So our end location is going to be a distance that we set from our character's facing direction. So we're going to want to get actor forward vector, which is going to be multiplied by whatever value we want, really. You'll notice in Unreal 5, not a lot of people talk about this. You'll notice in Unreal 5, if you plug in a float value, so let's just create a float. It will convert it automatically, but you can also right click and convert your pin to any of the pin conversions that are compatible with whatever node that you currently have selected. So for me, it's going to be, we'll go with a double precision float. And I'm just going to type like 250, but you can also just use a variable if you'd like. If I were to make a variable and use it for this, I would name it warping distance or combat warping distance, pretty much the distance threshold in which our sphere trace can go. Our radius, I'm just going to make it 50 for now. You can also make this into a variable if you'd like by just dragging off and promote to variable, or creating a float and plugging it into the radius value. For your object types, you can just drag off of here and make an array. Oh, not lame. Make an array. And we're going to choose pawn. For actors to ignore, we're also going to make an array. Oh, make array. And I'm going to get a reference to self. Yeah, if you type just get self, it's the only option in the list. And I'm going to plug that in. The reason I didn't drag off the array is, oh, it does. Okay, sometimes I've had bugs where this hasn't shown up dragging out of the array. Maybe that was maybe something else. But this is pretty much how we're going to execute our line trace. For now, I'll just turn on debug for duration so I can see what we're doing. We're going to return a branch, and we're going to break our out hit. And these are common things that you'll see on every sphere trace, because these are just the reason you sphere trace or trace for anything, line trace, sphere trace, doesn't matter. You're going to want to break your hit result for some reason. If you don't use your return value, it can be expensive. If you have cases where this might be firing off and you don't know when. So adding a branch is just it's just good practice. We're going to want our hit actor. And from our hit actor, we're going to want to use that same macro that I made before called mValidate interface. And again, if you didn't make this, we can go is valid into our true, and then we can go does implement interface, and we want to check to see if this implements our actually we don't have that interface yet. Okay, so we're gonna need to create a new interface to finish this part. If you don't have an enemy character yet, so for me I have a enemy base, and I just made a duplicate of my player when I got to a point that I thought was good to make a duplicate. And for you, you can just make a duplicate of the third person character. Your AI does not have to move for this. It just needs to be a character that's a pawn, that's not your player. So what we want to do is wherever our enemy is, you can create a interfaces folder that's separate from the one you had for your player if you'd like, or you can have a interface folder for all your interfaces if you'd like. It depends how you like things organized. For me and for this example, I'm just going to create one here. I'm just going to call it, oh yes, and to create one, just go to blueprints, blueprint interface. I'm going to call it BPI temp enemy interface. So you can call it whatever you want if you'd like to have an enemy interface. These functions that I'm creating, the reason I'm making temp interfaces is because the interfaces that I have a bunch of other functions as well that I also send to the enemy. So you can use that interface for all your enemy functions in the future if you'd like. Now, once you have your enemy interface created, let's open it up, and we'll create a function called get enemy reference. You can also just call it get enemy ref if you'd like. I'm just going to call it reference for now. We need an output. So in your function, if you have it selected, you'll have inputs and outputs down below. And we're going to need an output. And you're going to want to search for whatever your enemy blueprint is. So for me, it's BP enemy base is what I want. And if you have children enemy, so in my case, I have my enemy base, and then I have children enemy. So I have Void Warden and Phantom Blade A. So you don't want to get a reference to these because these are children of your enemy base. At least for me it is. And that's how at least most game developers like to work, is in a non-destructive way so that they can have these classes handle a lot of information that all your enemies will need, like health and stamina and stuff like that, but be able to edit them and modify them in your children. So we can get more into that later, but you're going to want your parent enemy blueprint reference. Kind of hard to explain, but hopefully you get it. So for my variable type, I'm going to search for enemy base. And I'm just going to call it return value. You could call it enemy reference or whatever you'd like, really. And once we have that created, let's go back to let's open up our enemy blueprint. And we need to add the interface. So in your class settings again, we need to add, for me, temp enemy interface. And you'll see it show up there. And you'll have a new function. And this one will be different. It won't be yellow. And if you're wondering why, it's because you have an output. And any interface function with an output will be treated as a function inside the class that inherits it. So we're going to open this up, and it'll open up differently. It won't be an event anymore. It'll be a function. For this, we just need a reference to self. So you can search get self or reference to self, a lot of things to get that. And I'm going to put a comment, return enemy reference. And that's all we need for this. Super simple. I'm going to make the color red because I like colors. Now, once you have your enemy reference created, we can go back to our player blueprint. And you can use either or method, but we're going to search for our enemy temp interface. And you'll notice this is why I created a temp one, is because I already have one named enemy interface. But if you made one, just use that. And then we're going to want a branch. So you can either use this or you can use the macro. For me, I'm going to use this, but I'll leave that up there just for anyone who wants to use it as a reference. And we want our temp enemy interface, same one we grabbed up here. And out of our object, we need to get enemy reference. And you'll notice it says BPI temp enemy interface. So what it's going to do is it's going to grab our enemy reference from here, which is going to return self. So whatever actor it hits, it's going to return the enemy's reference. And we're just going to set it as a variable. And actually, you can promote it as a variable, just like I did there. For me, I already had one, so I'm just going to set it here. And then we want to check is valid. Otherwise, it'll fire if it doesn't have a reference to the warp enemy. We have to create another function inside of it. I already created it, and I called it get hit direction. And I'll show you how we make this. So in your enemy blueprint, you're going to want to make a new function. Call it f get enemy hit direction. Now, if any of you were wondering what my enemy's arrows were at the start of the video, I'm going to show you. Those arrows have a use. In your enemy blueprint, in the viewport, you're going to want to add 4 arrow components: a left, back, front, and right, and name them accordingly. And I just placed mine 70 away from the center in whatever direction they were going. So for my right arrow, it was 70 on the Y, and forwards was 70 on the X, backwards minus 70, and etc. And then I moved them down a little bit. You don't have to move them down, but I moved them down 19. And it is the same height as the Unreal 5 character, so you can copy these same values if you'd like. And once you have all 4 arrows, what we're going to do is we need to add an input of a vector, and we're going to call it hit location. Out of here, we want to get a distance, and you want the vector. And it'll have v1 and v2. And our first one is going to be left. It doesn't really matter the order, to be honest, but we want to get world location of our arrow. So to do that, just drag out. So back arrow will be next. And I'm going to need a front arrow and right arrow, so you can drag all these out if you'd like. And we want to get world location. And get world location. So we're going to be doing the same thing for all of these. And get world location. Now, we're also going to make use of another blueprint method, which we call enums. Enums are really handy for returning multiple values in a nice categorized way, rather than keeping a bunch of ints or a bunch of booleans. So you're going to want your v2 as your world location. And I'm going to copy this for all of these. So 4 of these. v2 is going to be our location. And once you have those, we can make some nice reroute nodes, because we're going to need our hit location for all of these. Oh. And you can clean these up. With a bunch of these selected, just press Q, and it'll actually straighten all of your selected nodes. Clean these up a little bit. I like my nodes clean, and it gives you time to look at them. What we're going to need after you have this is a local variable, and I'm just going to call it L closest arrow distance, and make it a float. And we're going to set this. Actually, I want a do once. So we're going to do a do once first. That way we don't call this a bunch of times. And I'm just going to set this to 500 right off the bat before we do anything else. That way, because I know all my arrows are less than 500 away. Because we made them, at least for me, I made them 70 away. So the distance will be less than this. And we want the shortest distance, so we want to set it to a higher value off the start. And I figured this out because there was actually a bug with this if I didn't add it. But from these, I want to make a for each loop. And from our array, we just want to make an array. And we're going to make an array of all these distances. So we need 4 of them. And we have, we should maybe do these in order. So let's go, yeah, let's go left 0, back is 1, front as 2, and right as 3. Yeah, that sounds good. So I know for a fact that after my for each loop's done, I want to reset this. So I'm just going to make a sequence. It's going to look a bit weird, but we want to reset this. And we can do this like kind of cool thing. That works. Straighten those out. Now we want to return after this. And we'll return something like this, but we need to set it first. So from our for each loop, we want to do a compare node. And this will compare, we want to compare floats. So we want to compare our distances. So we have our array, and we can plug that in here. And then we have our closest arrow distance. So in our local variables, we can compare it with our closest arrow. And whatever our, oh, sorry, we want to set this. So greater than, equal, less. Whatever our closest arrow is, we set that value. And then after we set our closest arrow distance, we also want to promote our index, array index, to a local variable. And we'll call it L closest arrow index. Oh, name already in use. Okay, you can call it closest arrow index if you don't get that error, but I don't know. Maybe I have something else that's named, but local variables shouldn't be in conflict with that. That's really weird. So we have our closest arrow int, and we want to yes, we need to make our enum. So to make your enumerator, I'm just going to place it here, but you can make enumerators folder if you like. For me, I have inside my player and enemies folder, I have enumerator folders that are tied to the player and the enemies, so they're a little bit separate. And I like it that way. Some people like having them both the same. It's just kind of how you like to structure your project. But I'm just going to create it here. So I have, if you go to blueprints enumerator, we can call it E underscore hit direction. And inside here, we want to make 4 and call it left, back, front, right. And we just save that, close it up. We can close this too because we don't need that anymore. I'll show you that later. But back to your enemy blueprint where we were creating our get hit direction function. We want to return this enumerator that we just made. So if we search for hit direction, you'll see you have, let's name it, call it hit direction. So we inputted a hit location, and we're going to output a hit direction based off of the functionality that we made. And we want to select. And we're not going to select off a wildcard. We're actually going to select off of our closest arrow index. And we need to add 2 more pins because we need 4 directions. If we look at our array, we have 3, for a right arrow. So we want option 3 as right, option 2 as our front, the same order I made it, so just for ease. 1 is back, and left is 0. So that's going to return our hit direction from whatever our location that we input to our function is closer to. So that was kind of a long explanation, but wherever we hit, it's going to find which arrow that hit is closest to, or whatever location that we input into the function that we made. It doesn't have to be a hit. I just called it that. But back inside your player, where we grabbed our enemy reference, we can grab that get hit direction function. And you're going to want to make it, if you didn't already, sorry I didn't do this before, but we're going to want to make this a peer function. Get enemy hit direction and check on peer. The reason mine showed up the way it did is because I'm still calling my old function. So out of our direction, we actually want to do a select node, and we'll get all our directions. So this is kind of handy. And now we can get our warp enemy reference. And from our warp enemy reference, we can get each of those arrows. So right arrow, left arrow, back arrow, and front arrow. And we'll plug these in here. Left, back, and right. And I'll just clean this up a little bit. Better. I can do better. I can do better. Okay, there we go. And out of here, we want to get the world location. Now, rather than doing all of this, you could just get actor location and be lazy. Because in all honesty, that is the lazy way of doing it. But I found problems with this. And the reason I use the arrows is because it creates a little balance. And you could use like a sphere radius and just warp to the outside of that sphere or something. But I'm already using the arrows for other things. And I think the arrows are very visually appealing and allow you to see what's going on. So that's why I like it. And essentially it's just a location in the world, so it's not very expensive. And I turn them off when I'm done. And the reason and the way we're using interfaces and everything, it's not gonna make any effect on the performance. So from this, we want to grab our warp enemy again. And we want to grab our actor location, because we are going to need this for other things. And we want to get our actor's forward vector. Oh, not transform. Forward vector? Yeah, get actor forward vector. That's what we need. And we want to subtract these two from each other. And we want to find our look at rotation. Oh, this is going to be our target, though. And our start is going to be our location. Our return value, we need to split this. So now we need to get on to the even cooler stuff. I know you haven't seen anything yet, but we're getting there. We need to add our motion warping component. And if you don't already have motion warping enabled, you need to go to Edit, Plugins, and search for motion warping. And it's in beta, but turn that on. And once you have that on, you might have to restart your engine. So once you have it restarted, come back to your player, and we're going to continue on here. We need to add motion warping to our player character, not our enemy, our player character. And once you have that added, which I already do, we need to get a reference to it. So you can just drag it out and drag out from motion warping component. And I'm going to add or update warp target. First one that pops up. And it'll be a structure. So we can split it. And you'll have a warp target name, location, rotation, blah, blah, blah. We don't need a bone name because we're not really going to use it, but I'll type one in anyways. We'll just call it, just put root in there because I'm actually not sure if this is our root bone or if this is only applicable if we're using bone warping, which I will show you once we add our motion warping to our montages. From our is valid, we'll plug it into our add or update warp target. So this is just out of what we made before. Also, our hit location, it's just going to be our get actor location. So you can just you get that a couple ways. Get actor location. That's going to be our player location. It's going to be our hit location for this. But this function will be really powerful if you're doing combat stuff in the first place. The way I use it is I actually use it for telling my enemy's animation blueprint, what direction they got hit, and then playing a specific animation based off of that direction. So I can go over that stuff later. Put some stuff in the comments if you're interested in anything that I've been talking about in this video, because I know it's been long. Just let me know and I will talk about this stuff in other videos. We want to split the struct pin of our rotation because we only need our X and our Z. So we don't even need our X really. Yeah. We just really need our Z, but if you can try this if you want, but our world location is going to be all the math we did before. And our warp target name, this can be anything you want, but I keep in mind you have to spell it correctly, just like doing other things in Unreal Engine. If you don't have things named properly, it could cause issues. I'm going to call it combat target. And then let's just print a string. And we'll say attack combat warping success. Sure. Now, in our reset, let's just add this to our comment. In our reset, we can copy our motion warping component. And from here, you're going to want to remove your warp target. And to be safe, let's just go over here and copy this. And then after you remove your warp target, we want to take our enemy reference that we set earlier and just remove it. Just set it to null. So that was the enemy reference up here. I just called mine warp enemy. And we'll add this to our comment box. If you're wondering what this is, it's another plugin that was in my video, and it's called Auto Size Comments. You can get it off the Unreal Marketplace. And after you have updated and reset your warp target, you've made those events, you can open up your animation montage. So if you don't know how to create an animation montage, you can find one of your animations. So if you have an attack animation, you're going to want to create an anim montage. For me, I already have some combo montages and attacks and stuff like that. So I'm just going to go into one of those montages, and you'll notice I have this little guy and he's doing his cool attack. But there's a notifies section, and I'm going to add a new track. if you're wondering what this is another thing built into Unreal 5. It's called Disable Root Motion, and I use it incrementally in my montages to allow the character or the player to turn. So you'll see I made it so that when his feet are sliding, it disables root motion, and the player can actually aim the character for a split second before they attack, rather than you kind of being stuck there. And I found it really added some nice elements to the combat, and it was pretty easy to do. So in your notifies, you're going to want to add notify state, and if you've enabled the motion warping plugin, you'll have this new Anim Notify state called motion warping. Add that in there, and let's maybe make it so that when he releases here, or maybe a little bit before, when he releases, because this is a pretty quick attack. So as he's slicing him, I'm going to motion warp. And we're going to make use of our functions by adding another notify track. And we need to make an Anim Notify. So if you created a montage and you put it somewhere, I have a montages folder. I have a folder for everything. Montages folder. And inside there, I have my combo montage. I also have a notifies folder. So if you want to create a notifies folder, you can go ahead and do that. And for me, I have a find combat warp target. So to create an Anim Notify, you can right click and create blueprint class and go Anim Notify. And you'll have Anim Notify and Anim Notify state. You want the state. State will have a start and an end, and a regular notify will just fire once. I'm going to call it ANS update combat warp. And once you open that up, you're going to want to find your functions tab and click override, and we're going to override receive begin notify. Or receive notify begin. The reason we created a function in our animation blueprint and our player blueprint is because out of our mesh component, if we get our anim instance, we can validate our interface. We can find our temp anim interface, and we can call update warp target in our temp anim interface. Plug that in. Return value is true. Let's duplicate that. If it's false, let's return false. And that's all we need. In our received notify end, let's actually copy this. Let's delete that. So we do the same thing, but call the reset. So we check if it's our temp anim interface, our animation interface, and we want to reset warp target in our animation interface. Now, that's all we need. It's once you get here, you're like, oh, was it that simple? But it was. So before leaving your notify, one cool thing we can do is in your class defaults, you can change the color. I kind of like doing this, so I'm going to make it like, no, let's make it cooler than that. Whatever color you want, I'm going to go with orange. And if you go back to your combo montage or your attack montage in our other notify track, or you can put it in the same one, but I'm going to make it so it fires a little bit before and ends a little bit after our motion warping. So in the same tab, our add notify state, you can select your update combat warp or whatever you named it. And this is when it's going to fire the begin. This is when it's going to fire the end. So yeah, and this is when it's going to be updating that target that we set in the player. So after we enable it and allow it to do so, motion warping will take over. It'll update its target based off the location we inputted. And it'll do some cool stuff. So let's test this out after all of this. For me, I have my attack set up on my right mouse. It's not really... Oh, ha! You want to know why it's not working? So in our combo or attack montage where you have motion warping, in our root motion modifier, the reason I said I don't think we need a root bone name or anything is because there's this where is it? Yeah, the reason I said I don't think we need a bone name is because there's this hidden stuff where if you're not set to an anim provider, I think maybe it takes the root bone by default if you have it as none, and then you can specify a different bone if chosen, but I've just kept this as none. But we need a warp target name, so that's combat target for me. And to be safe, you can just copy yours, but I know that it's probably that. So let's test this out again. So yeah, you can see now I'm actually, there's a little glitchy there, but I'm actually warping to the nearest arrow. So really cool, hey? So you can move these arrows around and adjust the distance that it is allowed to warp from and stuff like that, but wow, does it make some of the combat feel nice. And I'm only going to add these to some of my attacks, because it only does it on my first one, but I'm only going to add it to some of my attacks. So yeah, that's how to add motion warping to your combat. And you can use this for many things. So for example, if this was a grappling, or sorry, a mantling animation, I would set my location to maybe a little actor in the world. So have like a, they have these things called target points, and maybe you could grab one of the target point locations and have it like up here. Maybe not there, but if you were mantling or something, you could have your mantle animation from here to the ground, like warp to this height. There's many things that you can do with it, and I hope this method encourages people to try some new things. Yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that and found that video knowledgeable, and I hope you make use of the things that I showed you and the methods that I've learned and made use of. And I will talk about more things, so feel free to comment if you heard anything interesting that you want me to talk about in the future or show you how to do, because I know I may have missed some things or covered some things that had nothing to do with what we were actually doing in the video. So feel free to let me know what you want to know about, and I'm happy to help if I can. Have a great day.